Welcome to Jack's Corner, where conservative values meet national headlines, and truth and reality have a seat at the table. From Louisville, Kentucky, here's your host, Jack Richardson.
Well, welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. And what a week we have had. It's just absolutely wonderful. I can't remember a time when I was excited to come back from work and watch the news. And there's a lot happening. For me, this is déjà vu. The parallels between Reagan and Trump, both of whom followed the disastrous presidencies of Carter and Biden, respectively, reveal a number of things, not the least of which are the consequences of liberal and leftist rule. Both Carter and Biden were rank and deplorable liberals whose policies brought devastating results to the country. I lived it, and I know it. Carter gave us 12% inflation, over 10% unemployment, and 21% interest rates. I couldn't even afford to buy a house. I had to live at mom and dad's house because no one could afford 21% interest rates. Iran took our embassy hostage, and our Panama Canal was given away by Jimmy Carter for $1. We were a joke around the world. Biden gave us just the same. Inflation, high interest rates, hostages, disgrace around the world, and the world went from peace under Trump to global war. From the invasion of Israel on October the 7th, 2023, to nearly 1 million lives lost in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Reagan won in a landslide. He was a no-nonsense tough guy. His second inauguration was held in the rotunda due to weather. Our hostages were released upon his inauguration, and afterwards we entered a period of peace. Inflation came down, as did unemployment, and our economy was revived. We had an economic boom, and I was able to buy my first home. Trump won with an overwhelming victory. His second inauguration, due to weather, was held in the rotunda of the Capitol as well. He is a no-nonsense guy as well, and the terrorists holding our hostages quickly came to the negotiating table and agreed to a release. As he did in his first term, Trump will restore the economy, bring down inflation, restore our borders, and respect will grow for this country and for America around the world. In fact, in just the first few days, it is all happening before our eyes. And like I just said, within the first 5 days of Trump's presidency, he's done more in just 5 days than Biden did in all of his presidency, and in a positive and a good way, not in a destructive way that Biden did. Nothing is new under the sun. The liberal policies of the 50 years ago didn't work then, and they don't work now. They never work. When will people ever learn? Our greater enemy, besides the media and leftists, is our own ignorance and lack of engagement. When we fell asleep and we were allowed to be scammed by the media, we elected Carter, and oh, how we suffered. Most don't remember that, but I do, because like I said, I lived it and suffered under it. Likewise, when we fell asleep and allowed the media to deceive us 50 years later, we got Biden, and oh, how we have suffered. So yes, this is a déjà vu, or at least for me. History does repeat itself, and we are fortunately looking at Reagan 2.0, a shining city on a hill, and Trump 2.0, America's golden age. And this brings me to my next topic, and there's been so much news hitting out there just by the hour since, I'd say Reagan, Trump has taken the office. One of the negatives here that I wanted to talk about was what I call, in an article I wrote, a bishop that does not know Jesus Christ. The recent attendance by President Trump at the National Cathedral the day after his inauguration has been a long tradition. However, it should have been paused this year because it was overshadowed by a Bishop, Mariann Budde, who, true to liberal form, she lectured on liberal and woke issues, not Jesus. Of course, it's clear she never knew Jesus, because if she had, she wouldn't be called bishop. Had I been in Trump's shoes, I would have walked out. In fact, there was a time when I did just that because I don't toxically suffer or tolerate what is so patently wrong. I don't do this to prove I'm right. I do it for the benefit of others who may be swayed or deceived by the cesspool of lies we live in and live with. What Budde did was clear error, and that error started with her being in the pulpit and ending with lecturing and giving cover for sin. She couldn't have been more inappropriate. Again, that is the nature of the radical left. No one should have subjected the president to the abuses perpetrated by this fake bishop, and the president's team should have known that, if for no other reason than a woman was wearing a clerical robe. That was a key warning. First and foremost, Budde was not a minister or a bishop. She was an impostor, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Why? It's against biblical principles for a woman to wear the robe or claim to be a bishop. You can find that teaching in 1 Corinthians 14:34 through 35. Scripturally, women are not permitted in these positions. Therefore, Budde's assumption of the role she held violated the biblical principles she was ordained to uphold. This clearly would indicate her lack of knowledge and understanding, but it's more than that. It is outright rebellion and disrespect for the Christian scriptures. This is why the Episcopal Church is dead and hemorrhaging in members in vast numbers. This is a heavy judgment, and a heavy judgment will fall upon those who have brought shame upon the church and for deceiving those in the pews. The same is true for the Methodist Church that I left, as well as the PCA. Now, yes, there are good people within the Methodist Church as well as the Presbyterians. But Budde is a fraud, an imposter, a pretender of the worst sort. And those who have practiced fidelity to Scripture and true church, the true church, need to speak out and condemn these heretics with loud and unambiguous voices. They have a responsibility to protect the church and shepherd the sheep and the sanctity to Scripture, protecting them from the wolves who have entered the church. There are times when wise words need to be spoken and heard. There are times when it is an offense and sinful not to speak the truth with boldness, if for no other reason than to protect the flock, which is, after all, the job of the pastor, a minister, or priest. Budde, under those robes, revealed who she really was, not just on the day she vainly attempted to lecture the president instead of preaching Jesus Christ, but when the next day she made the rounds of all the leftist talk shows and news shows, not the least of which was The View. The apostates, heretics, false teachers, and prophets in today's churches are truly what I call the walking dead, because soon they will hear these words, quote, "And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." And that's my take on the embarrassing and inappropriate situation where President Trump went to the National Cathedral. And that was a shame, but it's not going to sire all the blessings that we are reaping right now in just 5 days of President Trump's second administration. And that brings me to another topic based upon one of his executive orders. And this is really important, and this is with regard to the birthright citizenship. Now, this is how I would argue it to the Supreme Court, and this is very important. Let's start with this. Here's a very important clause for you. Quote, "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof," end quote. So why is this clause so important? Well, let me put it into a context for you. The 14th Amendment, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution reads as follows, quote, "all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, comma, are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside," end quote. The issue of anchor babies, or one being a citizen merely by virtue of being born on American soil, has become a central issue over the last few years because foreigners have learned how to game the system, as President Trump has said. And he's right. That is, people are illegally taking advantage of our Constitution and the privileges guaranteed only to its citizens by illegally coming into this country, pregnant, and giving birth here and claiming that their child is an American citizen. No other country in the world allows such an abuse of its rights and its privileges reserved only to its citizens. And in fact, in order to become a citizen of this country, one has to apply for that citizenship and undergo the rigors of meeting those qualifications, which the naturalization regulations in the United States give no exceptions. This would apply to the unborn and later born of those who are not yet citizens simply because the child is nothing but an extension of its parent. Let me digress here for a moment. As in real estate, property cannot be without an owner for even a split second. Likewise, there is no such thing as a man without a country. When reading the first sentence of our 14th Amendment, the phrase that I initially read to you, and I repeat again, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is of great significance and import. I think of the Latin phrase and application which is given to our laws, ut res majus valeat quam periet, which means that a thing may rather have effect than be made void. In other words, nothing in our Constitution is a throwaway, much like the Bible. Each phrase has a meaning. There is no phrase or meaninglessness. Everything has a weight and significance. What so many on the left do for their own selfish and self-serving purposes is to ignore that important phrase, quote, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, end quote. And let me explain why it is so important. As with real estate or being bound to some country, jurisdiction is vitally important in determining whether someone born in the United States is a citizen or not. That very important second phrase of the 14th Amendment is a qualifier to the phrase, all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Let me be clear here. What the main point is you don't become a citizen of the United States by virtue of your birth alone, but by virtue of the predicate. And that predicate is you are either born of an existing citizen, naturalized person, or of one who holds legal status. Jurisdiction is a key phrase throughout our law, and it governs many things as it relates to your residency of a certain country or state. For instance, if you are in the state of Kentucky, but have not resided here for at least 180 days, you don't have, as a citizen, you don't have access to the courts. You would resort back to your previous jurisdiction or state from which you came. Jurisdiction plays a big role as to whether you have a cause of action, whether it belongs in state court or federal court. This reminds me of the Apostle Paul. The Pharisees had no jurisdiction over him, such that they couldn't put him to death. He was a Roman citizen. So you see, the word jurisdiction is very important. That is why the Democrats like to ignore it. So getting back to the issue, if your parent is not a citizen of the United States and you are born here, you are an extension of your parent and therefore are under the same jurisdiction that they are. And that would be the country from which they came until citizenship is established here. The birthright citizenship issue has been grossly misused for political purposes by the Democrat Party and wrongly applied by both parties. It has been so abused that it has now been forced upon our country, and the courts are now being forced to deal with the issue that has been neglected far too long. And it is time for this country to reestablish its sovereignty over its borders and who qualifies as a citizen, as with every other country in the world. The way this amendment has been applied is an absolute absurdity, and the rationale that I have given is the right one to be applied, and if not, the Constitution is going to have to be amended for the sake of the country. So that's an important topic. It's current because of the executive order that Trump just signed, and it is going to end up going to the courts. But that's the way that I would argue it to the courts, and I believe it is a correct interpretation because that second phrase of that first sentence in the 14th Amendment there is the defining phrase. It does have significant importance, and hopefully the Supreme Court, where this is heading, will interpret that correctly. Now, let's go to another topic I want to talk about, and that is border treason. Never let anyone within your sphere of influence ever forget the treason that the Democrat Biden committed against our country. Think about this. Between fiscal years 2021 and 2023, Border Control at the southwest border encountered aliens on the terrorist watch list from 36 different countries. Now, this includes, in that count, 2,134 Afghan nationals, over 33,000 Chinese nationals, 520 Syrian nationals, over 3,000 Uzbeks and Uzbekian nationals, and they were men, all men of military age. We must either destroy the evil within the Democrat Party or aid in the demise of the party itself, because the party's just become nothing more than a collection and a cesspool of evil. This can never be allowed to happen again. And it is not just the politicians that need to be held accountable. It is the voters too. You can start this process by confronting a friend, a family member, or coworker. Stop tolerating the ideas that are destroying your life and your liberties and your freedoms. This is called toxic toleration. It's wrong. We now have a great opportunity with Trump in office. So let's not miss this opportunity. Okay, let's transition to the next topic. And I wrote this article. It's in Bluegrass Chronicles, if you want to take a deeper look at it. But I want to deal with the true nature of liberalism, the left, a Democrat by another name. Over the last 4 years under President Biden, you have been given a true taste of not only what liberalism is, but its consequences. And of course, that's why you voted for Trump. As the joy currently spreads across the nation with the inauguration of Donald Trump, reflection is essential. We must never forget the extremes that liberals went to make sure that Trump never happened. From impeachment to political prosecution, attempting to jail him, and then bankrupt him, keeping him off the ballot, and then when all else failed, they attempted to assassinate him. This is all you need to ever know about the nature of the left. They have never been trustworthy and never will, because it's in their corrupt nature. Historically, they are corrupt and violent as they abhor the truth and are detached from reality. They reject all norms. They live with a pathological ideology that demands your worship and will stop at nothing to subdue those who get in their way. They are Machiavellian. The end justifies the means. And there is no crime that is off limits for them. Just hours before Trump took office, Biden pardoned those who were complicit with trying to destroy Trump and our country. Specifically, he pardoned Dr. Fauci, who masked, vaccinated, and quarantined you during COVID, and even helped fund its creation. He pardoned General Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who placed a private and unauthorized call to our enemy, China, to warn them. And this was without permission of the then President Trump. It was treasonous. Then we have the partisan Pelosi January 6th committee, including Liz Cheney, whose purpose was to give the appearance of bipartisanship. But we all know, how compromised and corrupt she was, with the new revelation that she was caught witness tampering. Biden even pardoned his son, despite his early promise not to, as Hunter had all the information and knowledge about how corrupt Biden and the Biden enterprise obtained money from our adversaries to enrich themselves. 15 minutes before President Biden lost his presidential powers, he pardoned his family. This is a confession that there was either crime or conduct strongly suggestive of crime. Based upon the evidence collected by Representative James Comer's committee, there were crimes, and they date back to extorting Ukraine when Biden was vice president. This is the double standard you get from leftists. Rules for thee and not for me. Think about this. They prosecuted and hunted down Trump for 4 years, who was exonerated, and yet Biden was the one who had to preemptively pardon everyone, including his family. More importantly, all these Democrats were complicit in the House and Senate. They gave cover to Biden and suppressed the truth from being exposed to the public as to Biden's mental incapacity. Yes, even back when Biden took office in 2020, he was in mental decline. The risk the Democrats and Biden placed this country and its citizens in particularly in this dangerous world, is criminal and unforgivable. This cannot be confronted with indifference, but with a future protective retribution in the form of a delegitimization such that they are permanently removed from power and influence. Finally, think of all the things the Democrats supported and pushed upon you and your family in the last 4 years. Drag queen story hours for children, DEI implementation, discriminating against white people, gender transitioning, open borders, allowing hundreds of thousands of foreign criminals and terrorists into the country. This isn't just anti-American, it's anti-human. It's time to celebrate, but it's never time to forget the previous administration's actions. Never forget and never trust them again, and never let your family, friends, or co-workers forget. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Jack's Corner, and we'll see you next week.